Hey, it's Monday night. It's Janet and Doug.
Hi, Doug Newberry.
Yeah, there is great hope.
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight, guys. And
You're going to talk louder because we're in the truck.
As you can tell, we're in another parking lot. This one happens to be, I guess the mailing address would be Tomball, Texas.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing thing. It's almost a joke because...
Hi, Ted.
Hi, Ted. We laugh because RV Wi-Fi is not
a lie.
It's a lie.
Yeah.
It's just, I was going to be nice and say it's non-existent, but it's a lie.
Hi, Tina.
And they usually don't put those RV parks in areas that have great cell service either. So hotspotting most of the time is not an option.
Yeah.
So a lot of these we just do
Rosie.
In the seat of a pickup truck.
Yeah, so we drove around again tonight to find Wi-Fi so that if it's Monday night, we're in the parking lot.
We are.
Hi, Kimberly. The topic tonight has generated a lot of interest,
Yes,
and we are offering this topic tonight because it's important and people are wrestling with it and families are struggling with it. And so is Fortnite saving the world? And this is going to be a different conversation tonight.
Yeah, and it's not about shame or is this a good or evil thing or anything like that. It's talking about the struggles that we as parents have with this. Number one, understanding it. Number two, understanding our kids' relationship with it as well. So,
yeah, and this is not something that has been there has not a history to look back on and say, well, what did parents in previous generations do with this? There's not a history for this. And so this is a different conversation too, because tonight's Facebook Live event is not about is Fortnite good or is Fortnite bad, or how do I make the right rules for this, or how do I control the situation, because control is an illusion in most of life, and is certainly when it comes to gaming and our children.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So we have two takeaways and a question. And
yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with it. We're created to depend on something.
That's one takeaway.
That's one of them. We'll discuss. Second one, we are created to serve something.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do we define living? So we're going to discuss these and then at the end repeat these again, and hopefully we've covered some good ground and planted some seeds. And
a different way to think about this, because instead of talking about the details of Fortnite, we're approaching this conversation tonight, and we encourage you to approach this conversation in your small groups and with people you trust, even in your own home with your children. Instead of talking about the game, talk about them as persons. Talk about us being humans. And because the first takeaway is, as humans, we are created to depend on something, right? We are dependent creatures. And this is the question: are we depending on something dependable? All right. And when we say we're created as dependent creatures, by that I mean we all wake up every morning with God-given needs, right? And I'm not talking about even weaknesses. We have those too, but we wake up every morning with real needs. And so we're dependent on something to meet our needs. And is gaming meeting our children's needs, right?
Yeah.
And because here's the real truth. Technology will never replace love as a way of meeting our children's needs. And that's a good definition for love, is that love is a process of meeting needs, and love offers us all the freedom to depend on something, but to depend on something dependable. And so here's the trick: when our kids spend a lot of time with Fortnite or Minecraft or another version of technology, is that since love is the process of meeting needs, we have to ask ourselves this question: where is love in this picture? Where is love in this relationship? All right, where is love in my child's relationship with Fortnite? Okay, I realize that your child your teenager, whoever, has a strong affection for the game, but that's not what I'm talking about. Where is the love that's meeting needs here? Because there's a chemical component that we are created to need, and that chemical is oxytocin, right? when oxytocin is missing from the thing that we're dependent on, herein lies the challenge with Fortnite. Your child is not depending on the love in the game, right? But your child is depending on the game to meet some sort of need for them. And so guess what they end up depending on chemically? They end up depending on dopamine. That's the rush. That's the adrenaline. And so because there is no oxytocin in there, but because there is dopamine in the activity, there is the excitement, there is the rush, then they get to depend now on dopamine. And so they're not choosing to get addicted to Fortnite. They're just designed.
So oxytocin being the love hormone.
Right.
And dopamine being the ones where addictions are birthed.
Right. And so anytime we depend on something and love is missing in the story, the reason it's meeting our needs is because dopamine is meant for our good, but it's not. It is the hormone of addiction. And so it's where our real needs are getting hijacked. They're not getting met. And so we need more and more and more of whatever it is that we're depending on to meet those needs. And love is missing, so our needs won't get met. Right?
And any good marketer, and they certainly have a building full of marketers, they're aware of these things, and they're aware of who their audience is. They're aware of how to attract them, and really pretty much setting the hook for that.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with food, groceries, or soft drinks, or whatever, or there's a whole host of things. They know how to do this, but this in particular with the kids.
Right. We just need to tell our kids.
Yeah.
Where's love in the story? If love isn't in the story, does this thing care for me? Right? Does Fortnite care for me? Because I care for it. Does it care for me? Because if not, it's not going to meet my needs. And by design, we're going to get addicted to it, which takes us right to the second takeaway, right?
Yeah. We're created to serve something.
Right. We're created to serve something, and by design, well, I want to say this one more thing about we're created to depend on something, because we often say, and we hear this in our online classes and just in conversations with friends, many of us will claim that we have trust issues, that we don't depend on anything but ourselves, right? We don't have trust issues. We all trust something, right? And if all we depend on is ourselves, if that's all we trust, then all we've got is our own resources. We're as good as it gets, right? So that leaves our children vulnerable when they're just trusting themselves with Fortnite, all right? So this whole idea of we are created to trust and we are created to depend on something, and we can deny that we do, but that's like denying gravity, right? We can deny gravity and it's still going to have its effect on us. And we are still going to be dependent creatures, whether we agree that we are or not.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So jump into number 2, we're created to serve something.
Right. We are created to serve someone. Because there are weak and strong in the world, we are created for the strong to meet the needs of the weak. Think about a family, all right? Parents meet the needs of children, and the design is that when our needs are met, children grow up to be parents who meet the needs of children, right? And so I'm going to give you a visual. It's not 2 dots this time, but I'm going to give you a visual of a plus sign, and let this represent strength to you, all right? And as a parent, let this represent you, all right? And then I'm going to give you a minus sign. Let this represent weakness, or just needs, not even weakness, but just regular old needs. I have a need for significance. I have a need for purpose. I have a need for attention. I have a need. And so the design of our lives is that the strong will meet the needs of the weak. And it's almost like a magnet when these two things come together, all right, by design. And the cool thing that's supposed to happen is transformation. That this grows into this, right? So now we have a strong that can meet the needs of the weak, who becomes strong, who meet the needs of the weak, who become strong, who meet the needs of the weak, and that's called deeply satisfying life. All right, that's called healthy relationships, mutually satisfying relationship. This person's thrilled because there's trust here, and they're listening, and they're receiving the love, and they're watching the impact and influence on this weak one as they grow stronger. This strong one is excited because their needs are being met, and they can tell that they're growing up, and this is beautiful, right?
Yes.
Except
and I'm about to cough.
Don't, you can cough on Facebook Live, it's okay. So here's where things get toxic. If you ever want, this may be a helpful definition for a toxic relationship. A toxic relationship is when the weak meet the needs of the strong. All right? Clear in sex trafficking, right? Clear in slavery. Clear in just pure dysfunctional relationships, when the weak are required to meet the needs of the strong. That is a toxic relationship, right? That's not working out very well, because the weak just get weaker and they get more vulnerable. Because when you look at this card right here and you think children, think vulnerable, right? So this is not only this also meets their need for protection, right? Being weak means that you're vulnerable too. So which one of these cards is your 12-year-old child, and which one is Fortnite? Right? Who's the strong and who's the weak in the relationship, and whose real needs are getting met? That's just an interesting way to think about it, because there's no real needs being met by Fortnite.
Yeah, and what really scares me about it too is that in the absence of love, if love's not a part of the equation at all, and it doesn't seem to be in this,
right?
If love's not a part of the equation, it's not deeply satisfying. So you're back at it again.
Well, because your needs aren't being met,
and
right?
You're back at it again. So it's a cycle that is both predictable,
right,
and damaging.
So what if your son is 15 years old and he's got his first girlfriend? All right, so there's going to be some strong and some weak in the relationship. What if it becomes a toxic relationship? What if your son is required to always meet the needs of his girlfriend, but she doesn't really care about his needs, right? So that's a story that we can relate with. We would sit down and talk to our son and say, okay, this is your first time to have a girlfriend relationship. Let me tell you about healthy relationships and toxic relationships. And in mutually satisfying relationships, you get to trade places, right? She meets your needs, you meet her needs. That's a mutually satisfying relationship. And I don't see that going on, son. I see this as being a toxic relationship, and I kind of see you disappearing, right? The boy that I know is getting lost meeting all of her needs. If you're going to make sense of that story in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, is that what's happening in your child's life with computer games, right? Are the weak becoming strong? There's your question. Are the weak becoming strong in this relationship? Are they turning around and meeting the needs of the weak in the world too?
Or is the strong becoming stronger at the expense of the weak?
Right. We were having this conversation the other day, and I gave you a book for your birthday.
Great present. It was a book. My birthday was Saturday, and we go to the Astro games whenever we're in the Houston vicinity. Mm-hmm. But the book just came out, and it's called Astro Ball. Mm-hmm. And it was written by a Sports Illustrated columnist 3 years ago, or more than 3 years ago, because they did a front page cover. The Astros in 2014 stunk. They were
That's nice. That's a nice way to put it.
They were horrible. And they had been horrible for a while, and so people got used to being horrible. But if you remember, the cover of the Sports Illustrated had a picture of George Springer, the Astros center fielder. It was a rookie that year, maybe not a rookie that year, but close. And it said, "Your 2017 World Champions." and this was 2014. So everybody in Houston had a good laugh.
Right. We thought they were crazy.
But what was going on behind the scenes there and how they built this organization is kind of exactly what we're talking about now.
It was this.
Yeah, exactly. They looked beyond what just a good ball player, because there's a lot of those around.
Mm-hmm.
They looked at the person themselves, and they aligned them with people who were in mentoring positions.
Yes.
To bring along the ones that had just raw talent and not a whole lot of maturity.
They looked at it as the weak becoming strong.
Right.
Developing players that way.
And it wasn't just on the field, but the entire organization was handled that way. So I'm loving the book, and simply because it's about my team, number one, but number two, the story there's a big story, and it's about the strong bringing the weak along, and not just
using them.
Yeah, and not just in one or two relationships, but an entire organization. So you start thinking a little bit bigger than that. What would that look like in school, or family, or whatever?
Well, because we've had this conversation as well, that in this generation, is this just the way kids play together? Right? Is this the way they just gather in these online social communities, and because it's not safe to get on their bike and ride down the street and come home when the street lights come on and have a good time? Is this because some people often say this is just the way kids socialize these days? And so when you think about Astro Ball and you think about the story that Doug just told, think about when your kids gather in these online gaming communities. It's much like middle school, right? And I don't know who thought that putting 1,000 13 and 14-year-olds together under one roof was a good idea, but there's a lot of missing this in those kind of communities, right? Who's lending strength to who, right? And so that's what I would ask about in your conversations at home about these online gaming communities. It's not just a place to hang out, right? If it's a place to hang out, then who's protecting who and whose needs are getting met? Because here's my just bold statement. If this is Fortnite, Fortnite's needs are getting met, right? For the game's needs are getting met at the expense of the relationships, and the weak are not getting strong. We're not struggling with this game and the time that our kids are playing with this game because we're struggling with it because we don't see them maturing in other ways in their life, and we see it dominating their life in ways that we don't like. It's a bad girlfriend, right? It's a bad boyfriend.
And a large group, 13, 14, 15-year-olds that are somewhat immature.
There's not anybody to lend them strength.
It's an echo chamber, so they're all bouncing off of each other with each other's influence,
right.
That probably isn't coming from a great place.
And so if they spend 30 minutes in there, whatever, I don't want to even put a time limit. If they spend a small amount of time in that kind of online group, it may not do much damage. It's not going to do any good. But time is a resource we don't get back. We can earn more money, but we can't earn more time. And if childhood is the season of life where we're becoming an adult, then when are we doing that, right? It's not happening in this experience.
It's not happening on the screen.
Right. And so when are they doing that? And then it builds into this anxiety because they know they're supposed to be growing up, right? And they know they're not. And so we experience anxiety, we experience depression, we experience a less than satisfying life, which takes us to the last question,
okay.
Right?
The question is, how do we define living?
Yeah. And we basically have two choices. How do we define living? Because this is also often in the conversations we have with parents. One way of dealing with computers and technology and screen time and games is that we'll make our kids a list of the chores they have to do. The homework has to be done, their bed has to be made, their teeth have to be brushed, and some of us have even gotten creative and said, and if you be nice to 3 people, then after you're nice to 3 people, and all those things are checked off your list, then you can do what you want, right? Then you can have what you want. And so that is one way to define living. And that is summed up in this regard. If you can prove that you're good, you can do what you want. And that is a dangerous way to define living for young people, much less for people our age, right? If you can prove that you're good, then you can do what you want. Because here's the scenario there. How do I prove that I'm good, right?
And be better than you, right?
If the goal of life is to be good, then I just have to prove that I'm better than you. Or I just have to comply with all the things on the checklist, right? So I've done everything you've asked me to do, and now I get to do what I want, right? And what I want is immature, right? It's not, and so I'm satisfying my immature desires because I complied, and now I'm proving I'm good. And so here's the problem, guys. Even if they can't articulate it, they have this emptiness inside of them, and this hole, because their needs are not being met, and that's not life, right? Being good and getting what you want is not really living. Really living is existing in mutually satisfying relationships where you meet my needs and I meet your needs, and we're being loved and we're loving one another, and when I meet your needs, my needs are met too, because that's who I'm created to be. Right?
Yeah.
When you meet my needs, I feel great, and you get to be really you. All right? So there's a different way to define life in mutually satisfying relationships where we're experiencing love and we're being loved. And that is the part that's missing as hours of our children's lives are getting sucked into a gaming world whose needs are being met at the expense of our children's needs being met.
Yeah, and if they do all the things on their check-off list, I made good grades, I did my homework,
I made
took
straight
out
A's,
the trash,
right?
I mowed the yard, and now I'm going to go spend time on this, playing this game, and what am I going to, when I go to bed at night, why am I still not fulfilled?
I'm supposed to be satisfied, right?
And so...
And I know I don't even know how to run a toaster, much less a vacuum cleaner or a lawnmower. And I mean, there's just this pressure that builds up, whether they consciously think about it or not, that says, I'm not growing up. I'm trapped in this gaming cycle. And I don't even know that they're strong enough to ask for help.
If it's not deeply satisfying, your body knows it.
Right. And by design, they're trapped in an addiction because there is no love in the story. And so they're trapped by design. And so what do we do now?
Yeah.
This is, if you don't think we're absolutely crazy in bringing this to the conversation, then you're probably as, how did we do when we began unpacking this the other day? How would you describe our feelings?
Well, confused, because first of all, we don't understand the technology side that these kids.
But
so
when
we don't know what
became
we're
aware of this toxic relationship thing, because y'all, this is our grandkids
I got upset.
too.
I got upset because I witnessed it before
You see
in a
what
close,
happens.
personal way.
Yeah. And so, thanks, Bonnie. I agree that our kids do feel loved by us in other ways. We can meet their needs in other ways and still have this struggle with Fortnite. But here, how are we teaching them to navigate these toxic relationships? How are we teaching them to not navigate them? And here's what we're suggesting is that it's going to be long term, right? Yeah. It's going to be long term. It's going to be messy, and our children need to have this conversation. They need to know about that they are created as dependent creatures, and they need to know that technology is not love and it is not dependable, right? And they need to experience it without shame, but just in the truth of a real conversation. And we need to experience it too without shame, because I think most people that are watching this Facebook Live right now are watching because you're done with Fortnite, right? You're just over it. You're done. You've tried everything you know how to do, and you're frustrated. You're shamed. You're disappointed in yourself. You never thought parenting would be like this. All right. Can we protect you from that?
Yeah.
And say, you're stuck in a hard place, right? So
let me just say this. It's hard, and there's no question about it. And this situation, as you see your kids possibly disappearing into a screen, and you feel like you know them less and less and less, you need a community. You can't do this by yourself.
Right.
And other adults, other parents that you trust, that are in your life, in your kid's life, you're going to need to speak with them and let them speak into your life and you speak into their life, because by yourself, you're not going to be able to get to
right.
a position where you can help your kid.
Right. Because oftentimes we feel like this in our conversations with our children about Fortnite, and we feel weak. And so the good news is there are people out there that can help us, all right? That the weak can become strong, and our children need us to be. Our children need us to find someone that will help us, to find a community that will help us. They need us to be strong because they need protection in this regard. They need conversation in this relationship. They need to know how to recognize if your child was being sex trafficked, you would want help, right? You would want them to know that they are you would warn them about that. You would warn them about the weak meeting the needs of the strong. And so we're just encouraging you to have conversations in your small groups at church, have conversations with your friends over coffee, have conversations with us. Join one of our online classes and let's wrestle this out in our closed Facebook group, right? But have conversations with people about what's going on in the dynamics of the relationship, and how do you communicate with that with your children, instead of just, they did all I asked them to do, and now they get to do what they want.
And as a parent, don't be afraid to be here and approaching other parents who may have strengths that you might not have at this time, but you have strengths that they do. That's what our community is all about. We need each other. And so your child is worth it. And
I think everybody that's watching knows that.
Yeah,
I agree.
just step into it and just say, I think I need some help with this. And because there are people out there and groups out there that can lend you a lot of strength, and you can lend them strength as well.
Well, because here's where we get tricked. I mean, everybody's tired as a parent. Everybody's overdone, right? And so you have moments of your day when you're right here, right? You have moments of your day. And so here's where we get tricked way before the Fortnite Minecraft story happens. We hand our 2-year-old our phone, right? Because we're done, right? We're done. And so we hand our 2-year-old our phone, and then they get addicted to the phone, and then the story starts that builds, right? And so how do we, when we're done right here, how do we build our strength back so that we can do something with our children besides hand them something that's not going to meet their needs, right? Because technology is never going to replace love. And when we hand our children, or we allow them to have a relationship with something that is as addictive as computer gaming is addictive, and we know it's not meeting their needs, and we know that it's addictive, then we need to have that conversation, and we need to find people who can lend us strength so that we can be the strong one in relationship, and we can have a relationship of trust with our children, and they will let us navigate this messy thing together, not just comply.
And it is messy. It is so messy.
And so the crowd is gathered instead of gotten smaller, and we've probably added more questions to your mind instead of giving you more answers. And that was part of our goal tonight in starting this different conversation about Fortnite. And so we don't want this to be the last conversation. So as you have listened to this conversation, we want you to add some questions in the comments, because we'll come back to this conversation next Monday night. And we want you to add some questions in the comments, and we'll review these 3 takeaways as we close out this Facebook Live episode.
We're created to depend on something.
Right. We're created to depend on something. Are we depending on something dependable to meet our needs? Right? And are we inviting our children into relationship with something that is dependable? Right?
And we're created to serve something.
We're created to serve something. The strong are created to serve the weak so that the weak become strong. Is that what's happening? Because if not, the weak are in bondage to the strong. When the weak are meeting the needs of the strong, and which one of these is your child and which one is Fortnite in the story? Because a toxic relationship is where the weak stay weak, because they're meeting the needs of the game, because the game is not designed to meet the needs of your child. Thank you for the encouragement, Rich.
Yeah. And then the question, how do we define living? I can't wait to do this again.
Right, because there's 2 ways to define living. I've been really good, so now I get what I want. That's one way, right? So when we make those lists of things and check, I have complied, I've proved I'm good, now give me what I want. That's one way to define living, right?
And that takes you directly into the not deeply satisfying ditch.
Right? And the other way to define living is in mutually satisfying relationships, where it is about being deeply satisfied in knowing how to meet each other's needs, right? And if that includes a father and son hour in Fortnite together, don't shame yourself for that, right? But use it in a mutually satisfying relationship. Don't let your child go out on a bad date and maintain a relationship in a bad way.
Yeah.
Right?
If love's part of the equation,
it's safe.
You're on the right road.
If love is part of the relationship, then it's a good relationship, and you'll know because real needs are being met and weak are becoming strong.
Yeah.
I don't think we're having this conversation because we think the children in our country are becoming strong. We're having this conversation because the weak are staying weak, right? And so,
wow.
Yeah.
What a place to wrap up.
Yeah, so leave your questions. We'll come back to this next Monday.
Go to janetnewberry.com. You can leave your questions there. We also take a look at the classes that are available there too.
On the products page.
And there is, within those, we have a private Facebook
at the table group. You can ask these questions every day.
These conversations take place all the time, and we see some really neat stuff happening. So
yeah, and then we have a Brave Love podcast.
That's right.
And you can find a link to that on our janetnewberry.com website too. And this very topic is not this week's podcast, but it's next week's podcast.
Right.
So is Fortnite Saving the World is episode 4, which is, and will come out a week from Wednesday.
July 18th.
No, that's this week.
Okay.
This week is about chores and money. Next Wednesday. So
it's like a puzzle. It really is like a puzzle.
So thanks for joining us,
yeah,
guys.
Thank
it's
you
crazy
so much.
that we drive to the nearest parking lot to see you on Facebook Live on Monday nights, but we thank you for joining us.
Yeah, take care.
There is great hope.
Good night, folks.
Good night.